was a very young lad, maybe 6th or 7th grade, my mom had encouraged me to go ahead and do this school program over the summer where you would travel to a different city in the United States to go ahead and see the history and sightsee and learn about government and politics and all of that. And the first time ever was in Washington, D.C. And when I was in D.C., I got this exact hat. You know, it's a little bit beat up. Admittedly, I don't really wear it all too much, but surprisingly, it still fits my big head. So when I was a kid, one of my favorite movie series was Indiana Jones. I always thought that Harrison Ford played the coolest dudes. I mean, obviously he was Han Solo and of course Indiana Jones. Raiders of the Lost Ark was one of my favorite movies, and I had a VHS tape copy of it. I would watch that thing again and again and again and again and again. And I remember a long time ago when the fourth Indiana Jones movie came out, Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. And at the time, a lot of people were saying that it was terrible. And they said that they ruined the series and ruined the franchise and all of that. Controversial opinion, though. I kind of liked it. I'm not going to sit here and say it is as good as Raiders of the Lost Ark and certainly not The Last Crusade. For years and years and years, there was all this hate around this fourth movie. When I saw that Disney was releasing a fifth movie in the year of our Lord 2023, starring Harrison Ford again, back as Indiana Jones, I kind of feared that we would see more of the same from when Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came out. Despite my better judgment, I went ahead and I went to go see Indiana Jones 5 and the Dial of Destiny. And you know what? In my opinion, I think it is the worst of the 5 movies. I also think that a lot of people that are being overly critical might be a little too harsh on it. And don't get me wrong, there are lots of things to criticize for it. But you know what? Despite everything, I kind of had fun. And I think that just going ahead and going to a movie and having fun is fine. Yeah, you know, it's fine to enjoy a movie that's maybe not so great, but you had an okay time watching it. So the movie itself, let's talk. There's 2 highlights of the movie that I think are like the best parts, and that's the beginning and the end. The beginning of the movie starts off at a train station in the 1940s at the end of World War II, and it's young Indiana Jones fighting Nazis and getting artifacts and rescuing his friend on a train. That scene was pretty cool, despite the fact that the de-aged Harrison Ford looked a bit off at points. Just a point that during the movie, there was a couple of instances where like the frame rate dropped. Like, I don't know if it was like the movie itself or like where I was watching it in the theater, but the frame rate would get kind of choppy. And it was very clear that the CG was not the best as it was used in the earlier scenes to de-age Harrison Ford. There were some parts where he actually did look pretty good de-aging him, but there were some points where you could see like the lips didn't quite sync up perfectly, and I got to admit, they did nothing with his voice. So Harrison Ford now has like a very nice and cool, gravelly, smoker's kind of voice, which you would expect Indiana Jones to have as he got older. But the young Indiana Jones voice, they didn't make any changes, so it just sounds like current Harrison Ford. So that's kind of jarring. It was a fun scene itself, you know, lots of action and gunfights and blowing up Nazis and all that fun stuff. And then we go through the whole movie, which I'll cycle back to talk through. But I will say that the ending of the movie is also a pretty good part. This is probably the happiest ending that we could have ever gotten for Indiana Jones as a character. Throughout the course of the movie, spoiler alert, we find out that his son from, Shia LaBeouf from Kingdom of the Crystal Skull was killed. We found out that was very stressful on the wife, who they did get the original actress for again. And it has put a strain on their marriage, and they've gotten divorced. So Indy in the movie starts out very sad and depressed. And dare I say, I would even say suicidal at some points in the movie. However, after the events of the movie unfold, Indy is alive and well, and he is able to reconnect with his wife. And this kind of a beautiful little moment at the end of them together. And I thought that was nice. Does an interesting beginning and an interesting ending make up for all this stuff in the middle? A lot of themes that are going through this movie is involving the Dial of Destiny, which, as the legend Archimedes would tell us, it allows someone to time travel, or at least find where there are rips in time and jump through that portal to different time periods, allegedly. And we'll get to the twist there. The main villain, who is incredibly played by the amazing Mads Mikkelsen, is obsessed with getting this dial, going back in time, and assassinating Hitler? Yeah, that's kind of a weird point for a Nazi to want to kill the Fuhrer. Weird point. The character is kind of like, yeah, Hitler gave up on the war and that's why we lost. Kind of weird. And so throughout the movie, you know, there is this question of like, if you could go back in time to change things, would you? There actually is a touching moment between Indiana Jones and Helen, but we'll get there, where he says that he would go back in time to prevent his son from being killed so he could go ahead and let his son know how badly it hurt him and his mother and all that. It's rather sad. You know, to say what you want about Shia LaBeouf in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, but it shows that Indy really genuinely did care about his wife and his son and is really upset and still hurt by his son's death. And you think that the movie's kind of going to go on this like Endgame Infinity War kind of thing, where they're like traveling through time in different events. That would have been interesting, I think, but a little far-fetched for Indiana Jones. You know, there's always that like thin veil of reality when it comes to the myths. And of course, the dial itself is a monkey's paw like anything else. They think the Dial of Destiny is going to be able to like point them to certain locations to go back to certain time periods. And it kind of works. However, what the dial does is it shows a location. He doesn't adjust for continental drift, so like the changing of the continents and land on the Earth itself. Well, as like we as humans don't feel it, there is a drift and shifting as the planets evolve and move. They don't end up in the 1940s or 1930s like the Nazis want. They actually end up in Roman times. And we kind of find out that with the dial, it's kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy where Archimedes didn't he kind of made it, but like they take it back and then Archimedes sees it and like meets Indy. The parts in the plane were kind of cool, like seeing the Roman ships attack and they're freaking out because they think the airplanes that have traveled through this rip in time are dragons. They're like, that's kind of cool. That's kind of fun. Indy actually gets a Roman spearhead as a souvenir to take home. But the climax of the movie is where Indy has been shot by the Nazis. And it's weird because like he got shot right here, so like he definitely got shot in the lung. Like where the blood was coming, he most certainly got shot in the lung. And if you... Not that I'm a medical expert, but if you get shot in the lung, you're pretty much boned. And so he wants to go ahead and stay in Rome with Archimedes to experience this history. You know, he says that I spent my whole life studying this and this is my chance to see it, but he will most certainly die if he does stay. He gets knocked out by Helen, and again, I'll get to her in just a second. And that's when we wake up at the end where he's able to reconvene with his wife. So it's like, the idea of the scene is quite sad, really. He's so broken and depressed. His friends have died and his wife is gone and his son is dead. And he feels that he has nothing to live for. But it kind of shows that he is crestfallen with his life. And he realizes that, yeah, it's coming to an end. I might as well hang out here in Roman time and see some cool history stuff before I die. But that's not quite what happens. Let's talk about Helen. Helen fucking sucks. I'm gonna be honest. Helen was abysmal. She was not charismatic. She was mean and she was a liar and a thief. And not in like the cool, like charisma, like Han Solo kind of thief. Like, no, she was just a nasty bitch. Helen was the daughter of Indy's friend who was obsessed with the Dial of Destiny. It's also like it's supposed to be a plot point that Indy is her godfather. It's not really important. It just gotta. That's how they know each other. And originally, she says she's claiming that she's doing a thesis to learn about history and the Dial of Destiny. But what she wants to do is just sell it because she's a nasty gambling bitch. And she steals it, and she almost has Indy initially taken and almost killed by the Nazi/CIA, which is a whole other weird plot point that they try and do. And and the thing too is that Helen is just so infuriating. Her character doesn't make sense. There's no nuance. There's nothing interesting about her. She's just a woman who's here. And she steals ooh, look, she's so cool. And ooh, she gets to knock out Indiana Jones. It's bruh, what are you doing? I thought the movie was going to go in a direction where they were going to show that she wanted to go back in time to stop her father from dying or get final words with him because his life was destroyed for being so obsessed with this dial. And I thought that was going to be a really interesting point. But no, she's just a filthy gambler and she has debts and she wants to sell it. So ultimately, what could have been a cool character building, even if she was unlikable at first, they could have made her likable at the end, but they just very, very, very poorly written. I could kind of see what they were trying to do, but they missed the mark with Helen entirely. The villains are your standard Nazi guys. I don't really have much else to say. There's a pretty cool death scene where there's this kid, and he's handcuffed to the big buff dude, and they fall into a bridge, and what the kid does is he slithers out of the cuffs, and he cuffs the dude underwater to a cage so he drowns. And I saw that and I was like, yo, that's wild. One of the most important things about Indiana Jones, of course, is the action. The action was really only really good in the beginning and during the plane segment. But through the most of the movie, it kind of feels like a real slog to kind of get through. There's a scene where they're in I forget what the country is. I want to say Dubai, but that's not right. They're in a country, a Middle Eastern country, and they're there's a Fast and the Furious chase scene where they're chasing the Nazis in a car, but then Helen's being chased by this corrupt government official's son who loves her, and she broke his heart and sold his ring. It's bizarre. It was kind of hard to believe that this little shack-looking taxi little thing that they were driving through was going to be able to sustain getting bumped and hit and shot at, and it was held together with gum. It was. I couldn't suspend my disbelief that much to have it be very realistic. I will say I did when they were on the boat. That's kind of where there's a scene where they're on the boat trying to go into the ocean to find coordinates to the second half of the Dial of Destiny. And that part was kind of cool, when they go underwater and there's a bunch of eels, so it's kind of a callback to Indy being afraid of snakes. And the Giga Chad, Puss in Boots himself, Antonio Banderas, does make a guest appearance as a cameo character, but I was so happy to see him. Sadly, though, like with a lot of other things with this movie, that kind of gets screwed up. The Nazis find them on the boat somehow, and they kill all the crewmen, including the Giga Chad Antonio Banderas. Literally broke my heart. And there's a really awkward conversation where the Helen's oh yeah, we escaped and we hit the Nazis with dynamite. It was so awesome. And Indy's my friends just died. And there was this very awkward moment of there was no I'm sorry or no sympathy towards him. Just whatever, you old bastard, your friends are dead, I don't care, we're getting the Dial of Destiny. Like I said, Helen was the worst part of the movie, and the fact that she was in so much of it was a travesty. If she had gotten killed off somehow, that would have been fantastic. And so ultimately, is it the worst movie I've ever seen? No, it is not the worst movie I've ever seen. Is it the worst Indiana Jones movie? I think so. I think that there is a certain level of charm and charisma that Harrison Ford just naturally has with the character. Despite his old age, I think he does look pretty good. There's a scene where he's shirtless, and I'm dang! If those muscles are real, I'm jealous. This is very clearly going to be the last one. I really hope so. I feel like Indiana Jones as a franchise could have been more successful if Harrison Ford was more willing to do it. I mean, even after Crystal Skull, like I said, I liked Crystal Skull more than a lot of other people did. And I think that was his kind of chance to do some more aged Indiana Jones movies. But having these long, 15, 20-year gaps between the movies makes them really feel like unnecessary. You know, I still do think that Last Crusade was a perfect finale. You know, showing like the cycle between Indy and his dad. Like I just thought that was perfect. Plus the Chad Sean Connery. I honestly don't think I could recommend everyone to go ahead and see Indiana Jones and the Dial of Destiny. I mean, honestly, I don't really think it's worth paying for. If you're waiting for it to come on a streaming service like Disney Plus, if you want to watch it, hey, go for it. But through my criticisms, you know, I don't think it necessarily deserves as much hate as it's getting. With all the schlock that Disney's been throwing out recently, crappy reboots and remakes and these awful Marvel shows and movies that are just disappointing or boring or not interesting, I think this is like just ever so slightly above average. Not the best ever. Like I said, I still think this is by far the worst Indiana Jones movie that we've ever had. But I do think that if you're willing to be a little open-minded, maybe watch it with a couple of friends and some drinks, you might have a little bit of fun. Hey guys, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.